Eastward, leftward, leeward, homeward, eastward, leftward, leeward, homeward. The strange child.
Is it in English?
Mm-hmm.
It's
In English,
strange
it's the
child.
strange child.
So it's the same as the German.
Right, although there was the interesting debate about how exactly to translate fremde.
Because fremde is almost foreign.
Right, so it's just like stranger.
Mm-hmm. Like unusual or exotic.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or stranger, someone foreign,
Right.
or or strange.
Well, and there is that aspect of it, right? Because there's the visitations from the outside that are constantly happening. People are coming into the city and out of the village, and so there's a sense
Right,
that
but
there is these infusions of the foreign are kind of coming in and out of the story all the time.
Right, although in this case it is really specifically the child, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we debated for the title of it, stranger child. Like, do we want to imply that the child is strange, like weird, right? Not necessarily,
Right.
but stranger sounds like superlative, like stranger than
Right.
a stranger child. That didn't, in the end, we just liked the sound of the title, The Strange Child.
Yeah. Although I think we thought about the beautiful child.
We did for a while.
Yeah.
Why that?
Because in German, fremde, or however you say it, it just has these other connotations that strange feels very blunt, like the odd child.
Right.
So we wanted something that felt more flexible.
I mean, the whole story is so mysterious. Did you think of the mysterious child, or did you try to capture some of the? I wonder how you tried to capture some of the. I guess you could call it in today's language magical realism.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Toys coming to life, et cetera, et cetera. Was that part of your thinking in terms of the titling and the overall gestalt you wanted to provide?
Speaking for myself, in the final decision to stick with strange child, I think part of me thought it was kind of cool that it was strange.
Yeah.
Like in the end, it was mysterious. It sounded mysterious as a title, The Strange Child, even if it wasn't the original meaning exactly of fremde, which is a stranger. But we kind of maybe we thought that we agreed on it partly because it created a sense of mystery.
Yeah, and that's how it's been translated.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Two
That
times
is
I'm aware of.
right.
So what were some of the ways, either in the libretto or in the music, that you tried to capture some of the aspects that we are talking about in terms of this strangeness or this magical realism, call it whatever you will? How did you capture that?
I feel like you should start that because with your ideas about that's because of your ideas about the vibe of the character of the strange child that has kind of evolved.
I think I was just trying to be true to. I really love E.T.A. Hoffmann, so I was really thinking hard in the libretto how to be true to his spirit, which is always a little weird and a little off kilter, and mysterious in a weirdly clunky, like excessive kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
So keeping some of that spirit alive, but also needing to streamline his crazy story to make it a skeleton for an opera. Yeah.
Right.
Did you feel that there were ways in which you had to let some things go?
Oh, sure.
Difficult decisions to make?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Hoffmann's so over the top and the story is very twisty and turny, and that's part of its charm. So it took a long time to streamline it to the point where you could follow along in an opera. Yeah.
And to what extent did you feel like as you were writing, how is this going to be translated on stage? Did you feel like, you know what, I'm going to write this and deal with that aspect later, or was it in your mind from the beginning this idea of how will this be visualized, how will this be staged, or did that come in at later point when you started to make revisions to the libretto?
I think we were together thinking about it
Yeah.
immediately as what sort of actions are these characters going to be performing as they sing this line or that line.
For sure. Yeah.
So
yeah.
the images were always with you, even as you begun.
Yeah.
Pretty vividly, I
Yeah.
would say. Yeah. And a lot of, like, especially the visual aspect, I think Kim was conveying very strongly. And the libretto contains a lot of that information, a lot. And even auditory stuff like the sound of breeze and the rippling of water from a brook and things like that are included. So it was a very sensuous libretto.
So then how did you take that and, you know, you have a vast knowledge of microtonal music and you write a lot of microtonal music. So your music's very detail oriented.
Yeah.
And now you're writing this opera full of all of these kinds of, as you say, sensuous details and maybe almost extra musical music.
Yes.
So
Right.
did you feel?
Programmatic kind
Yeah,
of.
exactly. Yeah. So did you feel like that was a challenge, or was it just a curiosity or an interest of how to incorporate that into your language, or did you make your language more flexible and accommodating, or did it fit very naturally?
All of those things, but I definitely did have to accommodate in the writing of microtonal vocal music, my technique for an opera, because the singers have to multitask in a way they don't when they're just in a recital performance. So like have to moving on stage and be aware of so much else that's going on. So this type of microtonal, super detailed microtonal writing that I'm used to doing couldn't be the rule for this opera. So I in the process of trying to address that practical concern, I created certain techniques for certain characters. So the character who has the most detail-oriented, like busy kind of microtonal writing, is this Stork character who comes on the stage from time to time, interjects in the middle of the action with commentary, with quotations by various famous philosophers, which was a beautiful innovation of Kim's, an addition that's not in the Hoffmann.
Oh, interesting.
And I just love that. But that singer doesn't have to do anything but just, there's no choreographer, not much choreography for that person. So that singer just comes out and delivers the solo. So, and not only that, but I wanted that role to be sort of a Sprechstimme, speech song type of writing, but with fixed microtonal pitches. So I'm using sixth tones for anyone who's interested. 1/6 of a tone. So that person has the most challenging in terms of microtones writing.
But because of the way it's that you've conceived it, that will come through because there's less as you're saying, there's less choreography,
that's all that's going
more
on.
attention to the musical
Everything
aspect.
else has stopped, and that person is just singing.
So the moments where there's greatest focus on the actual pitch in the music are the moments that you take most advantage of to say, I'll deploy this language.
Right. It worked theatrically. It worked as well as on a practical level.
Do you feel like that makes those moments really stand out from the other moments?
And I needed to, because all the other characters are in the story, and the Stork is not. And there's this kind of little bit of mystery about how the characters are aware the Stork is there or not. It's just like all the action pauses and that character comes out and comments. So I needed to create something that distinguished that person's writing from everyone else's. So they're the only person who has that little. It's a kind of microtonal Sprechstimme type thing that other composers like Harry Part did that, and other Ezra Sims did that a little bit in a piece, and others, even Charles Ives did that a little bit, like just kind of a type of melody that's using micro intervals to simulate pitch in a very specific way.
So the voice has a lot of microtonal inflection naturally.
Right.
So did you lean on that to make the vocal parts more naturalistic at times?
Yeah, that was kind of in general how I use microtones.
To mimic speech.
Kind of, yes.
In a Sprechstimme way.
Yes. And for the Stork, it was most specifically speech. And I'll tell you in a minute an example that I have a fond memory of the process of writing. But for the children, the two siblings, in their case, they're singing, but they have little more free use of like quarter tones to create a sort of childlike type of singing that's not that refined.
Mm-hmm.
So that they actually have hard to achieve microtonal writing that's designed to make it sound less crafted.
Mm-hmm. And more childish.
More childlike.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they have their singing sounds. So it's like children and the stork who's speaking. So all the use of microtones kind of is applied to creates a more something that's felt as more natural in its contours. And then all the adult characters don't have any microtones.
Oh, interesting.
So that took care of that.
That's very interesting.
And they have a lot of action.
Yeah, so you really create. You've taken pains to create these different worlds.
Yeah.
And then what of the music when these inanimate objects come to life? What about the music there?
Okay, so the adult and those two characters.
Mm-hmm.
So there are two cousins of the siblings, and they're kind of already corrupted, or they're already conformist.
Mm-hmm.
So Chris, Lieb, and Felix, the siblings, are still sort of their natural selves, supposedly, right? And the cousins who are rich and snobby and materialistic
And very well schooled, very
well educated, that's key.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have microtones either.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those singers, but also maybe alter ego kind of characters they come back as. So they give the gift of two toys to the siblings, the cousins do. And then they come back later as angry toys.
The same
Singers.
Mm-hmm.
And still no microtones.
Oh, interesting.
Because they're like these automaton, scary, angry toys later.
Okay. So these are the ways that you've crafted the musical languages across the characters.
Right.
Yeah. Very interesting.
And then the ensemble has a lot of microtones as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's microtonal languages there, but certain of the singers don't have to use microtones.
And then what about the ensemble writing? How is all of this accompanied?
That's what I mean. So how is it accompanied microtonally?
Yeah, exactly. For example, when you're working with polyphonic textures.
Right. So that was a bit of a challenge, but for the most part, reconciling some people with microtones and some people without.
For example, yeah. Did you feel that blended?
Summarize that. Yeah. It was a big task, but a lot of the ensemble writing. First of all, it's a simpler type of microtones for me. It's just like only quarter tones.
Okay.
For the most part, with a few exceptions, it's just a quarter tones. Mm-hmm. So that actually simplifies things. So I usually use smaller, like 6 tones and 12 tones, and it gets quite busy and intricate, and they didn't have to deal with that for the most part. The ensemble didn't. Mm-hmm. So it's complicated, but you have to juggle those two worlds. So I will say this, that the strange child character also has an inflected singing that's designed to make that character childlike. Mm-hmm. But underneath it, that character is singing in these pentatonic scales that modulate all the time, so it doesn't get very stagnant. There's like microtonally inflected pentatonic scales.
Interesting.
But so I was able to match the pentatonic scale with the ensemble. So so it's, I don't want to get too busy into it, but
no, of course.
But it was that kind of thing, like a challenge for sure to match non-microtonal writing with microtonal writing.
Well, it's such an interesting story with so many characters, and so it's very interesting to hear how have you managed to differentiate these characters. And then Kim, it's very interesting to hear this idea of yours of having the Stork bring in these extra literary ideas that maybe frame some aspects or provide perspective on some aspects of the story as the story moves on.
Right.
I'm kind of curious about that, and I wonder how how you went about selecting some of these excerpts. To me, the idea rings of a certain kind of witness or ancillary perspective, and almost a kind of meta perspective.
Sure.
Someone watching something happen. You're watching them watch this happen.
Right.
And I know that also is something you're interested in your own literary, your own work.
Yeah.
You just have this new publication where you are commenting on the works of Karl Nusgaard, My Struggle. Mm-hmm. So this seems to be something maybe you're kind of comfortable with and interested in.
Yeah.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about how you designed that for this libretto. Go ahead.
I think you're right. It's a totally natural move for me. Like, I tend to almost be too meta, so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna let the Stork be meta in this. But I think collaborating with Julie, who's a really good friend, long friend, it was almost like there were definitely moments when writing the libretto, like, oh, Julie's gonna think this is so funny. And I think the Stork was kind of maybe just part of that. Like, I don't know how the Stork came about.
Well, the Stork is the only animal.
The Stork is, but there are also singing birch trees.
Okay,
yes,
right.
right.
Okay,
So the
yeah.
Stork and the birch trees, like you said, they comment. They're kind of a choral element.
Mm-hmm. Which makes sense in terms of that kind of natural perspective, the depth of that natural perspective.
Totally, yeah. And also it was very useful in terms of, like, you know, we were talking about the excessiveness of Hoffmann, like trimming down the excessiveness to make this bare bones story, but still giving the audience direction, like, this is what's going on here. The Stork is going to clarify for you what's really happening between, you know, the Count and Sir Thaddeus. Actually, the Count is really giving some bad advice here. You might get that, but the Stork's going to make sure that we know that this is bad advice.
Did you feel that then, did you feel like, okay, I have to be careful here if that's the motive of the Stork and that's what a listener may take away? I want to be very clear about what I'm clarifying, or that the perspective is true to my interpretation? Or did you feel like, well, I can be more ambiguous here purposefully because I don't want to give too much of the perspective away?
I think the Stork is I think the Stork has a lot of character. The Stork is a strong character. Mm-hmm. So I think you get the sense that it's filtered through the Stork's perspective, but the Stork is kind of a reliable perspective. And the Stork is also, there's some intimations that the Stork has a special relationship with the father of the children. So Sir Thaddeus is the father, the kind of head of this little household. And he's often sitting outside and the Stork is nearby, and he sometimes sings in a way that it seems like he might be speaking to the Stork, and sometimes it seems like the Stork is speaking to him. But it's all, I think it's pretty ambiguous.
It is.
Yeah.
So, what drew you to such a topic?
Of the story.
Yeah.
I will just say this, that we had, like, as Kim mentioned, we've been friends for many years, and had for a while talked about the idea of doing something together. I got the idea of writing an opera. I met with Kim. I said, you know, maybe we should do an opera. And within seconds, she chose the story. Like, it was almost like it was already there. I have just the story. It's The Strange Child by E.T.A. Hoffmann. So why?
And what was on your mind at that moment of offering?
I think I just love Hoffmann. I was actually thinking about writing a novel. Someday I hope to write a novel about Hoffmann, but that was very much on my mind at the moment. And The Strange Child is, you know, the Nutcracker is what most people know E.T.A. Hoffmann for. He wrote the original Nutcracker, which I saw when I was 6. I saw the New York City Ballet, and it just changed everything for me to see that ballet. And I think his name got lodged in my brain, you know, when I was 6 years old, and it stayed there. And I've read most everything that's been translated of Hoffmann's, and it's all in bits and pieces. It's hard to kind of piece it all together. But the strange child is very much of a kind of companion piece to the Nutcracker. And the Nutcracker is his most famous work, and the strange child is probably his least famous work.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It deals with a lot of the same themes, like childhood, imagination. It winds up in a really different place than the Nutcracker.
It's a completely different story.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's darker.
The Nutcracker is actually super dark.
Yeah.
When you read Hoffmann's original, the little girl, you could definitely read it as him saying, and she went crazy. She decided to just leave behind this really restricted bourgeois lifestyle, her family full of pressures and goals and all these things that come into play in The Strange Child. And she decided to stay married to the Nutcracker prince, who we know doesn't really exist. I mean, he's never very clear. That's part of his magic.
But in the Fremde Kind, it seems like people. It's a torturous story in many ways.
So is the Nutcracker.
Yeah.
If you read, it's really worth reading because she's led. So in almost all his works, he has this character who's Drosselmeyer in the Nutcracker, and in The Strange Child, it's kind of split between the Strange Child themselves and the arch enemy, who's the children's tutor, but it also goes by Pepser and Pepacilio.
And Master Inkblot is the character's name in the story.
And so that character is always messing things up. So in Hoffmann's original tale, Drosselmeyer is a very, very ambiguous and dangerous character, kind of telling Marie, who's the girl's name in the story, Clara in the ballet, but encouraging her to believe things and then denying it in front of her mother.
That's right.
Drawing her into this fantasy world and then saying, "Oh, you really have to stop dreaming these things up."
Gaslighting.
Gaslighting, exactly. It's kind of scary. So it's pretty dark and twisty too. Yeah.
When once things started to move and you were like, and you said, yes, I'll take this libretto on. What drew you to what aspects of the story captivated you as the composer?
At the very beginning,
just as you set
magical
out,
aspect of it and the multifaceted nature of it. And I think it was pretty early on that you suggested, for example, the chorus of birch trees, and there's just a magical aspect of it. I have to say, felt drawn to working with a fairy tale as opposed to a more modern type of topic. It just was appealing to me to work with these magical characters and the strong natural themes, just so much nature.
So can you say something regarding that? Can you say something about the production? How is it coming along, and what are the aspects that you find to be most vivid, or that we all are going to be looking forward to watching?
Well, so that's a little bit of a mystery currently because it's all in their hands, and they're working on it really hard in Pittsburgh. But we do, so there's a wonderful painter, Shura Eskaya, who is working on the sets, but that's turned into a lot of more video work to our knowledge. So she's doing video work, and it kind of remains to be seen how that's playing out. But she's a really, really gifted and beautiful artist.
Great. And when will it premiere?
June 17 and 18.
Yeah.
June 17 and 18. Okay.
Yeah, a month. Exactly a month.
Okay. Well, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Glimmering, shimmering.